In this video, we're going to see how we can start positioning the player upon scene loads. All right. So in our last video, we were able to kind of load between scenes and check when scenes have been loaded. So that's a win. We also set up our exit controllers so the player can interact with an exit door in our level. All right. So the first thing we need to do if we're going to position our player is we need to be able to find our player object in the scene so we can nab him and put him where we want him. All right. So why don't we go ahead and see how we can do that in our game manager. So let's bring up our game manager uh, script. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to create it of public game object player object. So this is going to be our player in the scene. All right. Uh, and what we want to do is just make a new function that says public void find player. That way we'll be able to call it anywhere in our game if we need to. And we're going to say player object variable we just declared. We're going to initialize it to say it is equal to game object dot find object with tag player. The old tag. Tags are very useful in Unity, huh? All right, so cool. Now we have a function that can find our player, and anytime the level has loaded, we'll be able to find the first-person controller that we have tagged as player. So you'll notice there's a separate first-person controller in each scene, but they all have something in common by being tagged player. So whenever we load our scene, our level is loaded, we're going to also call immediately find player. So every time we load into a scene, we're going to reset what this game object variable is to the particular first person controller found in each of our scenes. Okay, the next part of position our player is creating an array of all the exits in our scene so we can check which one we need to position the player at. All right, so we're going to create a new public or a new function. It doesn't have to be public. We're never going to call it anywhere outside of our game manager. So we're just going to say void. Let's see, what should we call this? Populate exit array. All right, so that's eventually where we need to get to. Before that, though, we need to create a variable that'll hold all of our exits in our scene. So what we're going to do is we're going to say public game object. And I'm going to make it public so I can see it update in my inspector so I can bug test it if I need to. And if we add those brackets, then we know that this is a array type of variable, and we're going to call it exit array. Just like that. Now we have an array declared, so we can populate it with every single exit in our scene when we load in. We're going to call this every load scene. All right. Now we just need to populate our array with our populate array function. And we do that easily by saying exit array equals, then we're going to use a game object called find game objects with tag. And remember when we created that exit tag? So if you're not quite sure right now, go back to your level, that's old code, and make sure all your exit controllers are tagged as exit right there. See this? Make sure they're tagged. By this point, you probably are like, well, duh. All right. So now why don't we test our game in our game manager? So now we have this new exit array over here. So two things should happen in our game manager now. Our player object should be updated every scene load, and our array should be basically filled every time we go into a scene. All right, so let's test it. We hit play. All right, so you'll see something happen right now. We get our first person control, but we didn't populate our array. Well, let's unpause this. Oh, you know what? You know why we found our player but didn't populate our array? Well, on our level has loaded function, we call find player, but we never call populate exit array. So if we go in and change that, let's see what happens this time to our game manager script. We hit play, and something new happens here. Let me zoom in on it. We see that our array size is changed, and we get exit controller 1 and exit controller 2, as well as our first person controller for our player. So if we go into our next scene, boom, we can select our variables, and you can see that all of these point at our first person controller and our 2 exits. So now we can test between these exit controllers to see which one we actually need to spawn at. All right, we are hitting the last section of getting our player to position at the right areas on scene load, but we need to make sure one setting in our project is correct. Otherwise, we won't be able to position our player controller. So we're going to go to Edit, and then Project Settings, and then into Physics, and I'll zoom in. And we want to make sure that, I think, auto sync transformations needs to be checked. So make sure auto sync transformation is checked. Otherwise, your player controller will be just ignored when you're trying to set its new position. All right, now that we understand that, that'll make this a little bit easier. So what we want to do with our player controller, and why don't we zoom in on some logic here. We want our logic for our exit controller to basically function like this. And a lot of this stuff we've already got made. But why don't we just walk through it again so we have a clearer picture on exactly how we need to handle our data. All right, so our logic goes like this. Our game loop goes like this. The player interacts with your exit controller. That's pressing E while you're standing inside of it. The exit controller passes its unique integer number to the game manager. What is a unique integer number? Well, that's this exit number here. Remember when we were doing red is 1 and blues are 2 in the last video? So red areas will always be exit number 1. I want to undo that. And blue areas will always be exit number 2. So we want to pass this value to our game manager, because our game manager is ultimately what has our load scene function. So we kind of need to pass uh, 2 different types of information: what scene index we want to load and which exit we've taken. And then we load our scene, and then we've just created this functionality. Our game manager populates a new exit array with all the exit controllers in our scene. So every time we load into a scene, it makes a list of all our possible exits in our scene, which also happen to be entrances. And then a for loop, we're going to create this in this section. A for loop will go through each of our exit controllers in our scene. So it'll look at this one, it'll look at that one, it'll compare what exit numbers it is, so it puts you at the right spot, and it'll also adjust the player's position. Voila. So here is our code. So why don't we go ahead and just type it up. So this is going to primarily be in our game manager again. So in our game manager, what we want to do is create um, a variable that will allow us to access our exit controller from whatever controller we're passing into our game manager. So we'll say public exit controller, exit controller. We'll use that camel case to delineate between calling the class and making a variable name. All right, that'll give us access to our exit controller script in each one, which then we can use. We have access to this class, then we can look at these 2 integer numbers to help us figure out what to load and where to load the player. All right, perfect. And then we're going to create a new function called position player. This is where all the meat and potatoes will occur. We'll say void position player, like so. And what we need to do is create this for loop that loops around and checks every single exit in our array upon a scene load and figures out which number goes where. which exit number I need to put at. But before we can get to that for loop that'll do all that for us, we need to kind of rethink how we load our scene. Previously in our last video, we kind of just always load scene one, but we want this to kind of be able to work for both scenes. So we're going to create some parameters that we're going to pass into this load scene. All right, we're going to create a parameter of type int, and this is going to be exit param int scene param. All right. And since we still don't have anything to load into our scene, it used to be with one, what we're going to do is we're going to pass our scene param into which scene we want to load. So now we can take our scene exit number and pass it right into whatever scene we want to load. So we can set that on each door, right? So our scene number right here, that's the actual number we're going to pass into our function right here, our scene param. And we also want to widen the scope of these parameters. So other functions, specifically our position player function, can get to these values right here because these parameters only exist within this function right now. Remember when we made these past exit number and past scene number? Why don't we take use of them right now? Because this will widen the scope of these past parameters. Since we declared these variables at the top of the script, we can see them throughout the whole class, the whole script. So we're going to say past exit number equals exit param. And we're going to say past scene number equals scene param. So now we can access these past variables. And right now the game's going to yell at us too. Why don't we see how this load scene changes when we actually call it? So this is our exit controller. We're switching back there. And what we want to do now, load scene is cranky. You get that red squiggle because it's looking for these two parameters now, exit parameter and scene parameter. And you guessed it, we're going to pass in our exit number variables and our scene number variable. So we declared these right here. These are the variables that we set in our inspector up here, which delineate which exit area it is and which scene it should load when you interact with it. And so we pass these two numbers into our game manager right here through these parameters. And then we widen the scope of these parameters by setting these past values. So when we get to our position player, we know exactly what was passed into our game manager when we wanted to load the scene. It'll make sense when we start making our player position functionality. So we're going to create our for loop now. Inside here, we're going to say for int I equals 0. We're just making a counter, and we're going to say I is less than. Remember our exit array we created a second ago? Exit array length. So we're going to loop through it just enough times to kind of go through how long our exit array is, and we're going to increment our counter each time we loop through. Now we want to do a few things here. Remember when we made this exit controller variable here? Well, this is going to be our access into this information right here in every exit controller script. So why don't we go ahead and exit and enter that. So let's say something like exit controller variable that we just declared up there equals, and then whatever position we're at in our exit array. So we'll use our counter there because we're going to loop through our list, and this little counter there will be like 0. Then the next time it'll increment to 1. So we'll look at every single exit in our scene. And we'll say get component exit controller. So now every time we loop through our for loop, we get a little key, a little peephole into the exit controller class attached to our exit objects. All right, and then we're going to say if exit controller dot exit number equals our past exit number. So what does that mean? Basically, if we're looking at our array that houses all of the new exits in the scene we just loaded into, we're going to take a look at the exit number in each one of these objects in our array, and we're going to compare excuse me. And then we're going to compare it to our past exit number that we get right here prior to our scene load when we pass in the scene when we pass in these parameters. So see how we need to make this globally accessible now? So we can compare it down here with the individual exits in our array to whatever exit number we need to put them at. So what we're going to say, if this is true, so if the exit controller we're looking at, this exit number equals our past exit number. So if exit 1, we look at the exit 1 in the other scene, they match together, that's where we want to put the player. So we'll say player object dot transform dot position equals exit controller dot transform dot position. Or actually, you know what? We'll say exit controller dot spawn point dot transform dot position. So what is a spawn pos? Well, that's this public game object where we attached our spawn point here. So our game manager is now able to access our spawn point. So we'll put it at that position. And then I'm going to go in and duplicate. I'm going to be lazy because we just need to change position to rotation. So I'm going to select this line right here. I'll do a Control F to do a find. Let me try that again. How do we do a find and replace? Yeah. So we bring that down. So we say, I want to look for position and I want to change it to rotation. And I only want to do it in my selection that I have down here or that I'm about to make. And replace next. Perfect. All right. So now I have one for rotation and for position. Ooh, that's not good. We'll save. And hopefully that does it for us. So we're going to test to see if our exit array on our game manager gets updated, which we already know it does. And we're going to see if we end up in the right places. All right, so we'll start here. So I'm going to go to the blue side. And hopefully, oh, it doesn't seem to load me in the blue. Let's see if it does here. So let me go out and in. Okay, still putting me in the center there. Let's figure out why. All right, so let's see if we even hit this line of code by doing a debug.log player positions. So that's what we want to hear it say. So why don't we press play? I'm going to pause so I can bring up my console window. Scene is loaded. So we never hit, yeah, player is loaded. So let's figure out why, or player is positioned. All right. It's a brain buster, guys. Maybe it's because we didn't add our function to our level has loaded delegate system. So don't let these functions get made and not call them anywhere. So we're going to copy that name. And every time we load a scene, we're going to find the player. We're going to populate the exit array, and we're going to position our player. All right. We're going to quickly find that, let's put a semicolon there, that if we want to position the player at the very beginning of the game, we might need to create another solution for that. So we'll cover that after we prove that our functionality is now working after actually calling our position player. So it's just going to put us wherever, and then player position, but it didn't do it. So I thought I had set this auto sync transformation setting, but apparently it didn't take or something. So I'm going to make sure I save and save project again. And why don't we test it now? Alright, there we go. Put it into the red hallway. Put into the blue room. Blue room puts us in the blue hallway. Blue hallway puts us in the blue room. Red puts us in the red. And red puts us back into the red. So if that's happening, you're just not finding that your player position is being updated, even though you know your code's right, always check that dumb little physics setting, and make sure you save project afterwards, I reckon. All right. So now we're going to see how we can position the player at the very start of our scene. All right, to create our first spawn point, it's relatively easy. All we're going to do is just make a new exit controller. Now I'm going to position this beside the bed right there. All right, and we're going to do a few things to this exit controller. Notice how I started out calling my exits by 1. Well, this is going to be exit number 0, which with the way our code's set up, will always place the player here first when we start our scene. Let's make sure our spawn position is pointed the right way. So that's not a very good place. So I'm going to make the spawn position kind of right there beside the bed, like so. And what I'm going to do is make sure that my sphere collider is probably taken off. That way I can't interact with it. And why don't we see if that works for us? Yep, I start out right at my bed, but yet my other exit controllers work perfectly. Or do they? Is my blue being loaded to the... Alright, so my blue is being loaded back here to my bed. So let's troubleshoot that. So exit scene 0. So it might be something in my other scene. So I'm going to save this. And we're going to go to scenes, scene 2. So it should put us at the right one. So let's see how our game manager gets loaded, or our exit array gets loaded. All right, so we have 3 exits now in our game manager. All right. So we have element 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, or not 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. So now when we load into our other scene, yep, it should update our exit array to only have 2 now. So we have this one and that one. So here's our exit 2. All right. So do I get sent back to red here? Oh, it looks like I just get defaulted back to the bed when I do this. We might have to rethink how to do this. So what we need to do, if that's not going to work, is create our own solution. And we can do so pretty easily. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a new public game object variable. And since we already have a public game object variable, we're just set up. We're just going to add to after our player object and call this start pause. So this is going to be a variable where we can hold a starting position for our character. All right. So why don't we go in and see what our game manager does. So now we have a start position. All right, perfect. So we're going to create an empty game object now inside of our scene, and we're just going to call this start position. And you don't have to do anything special with it. Just position it where you'd like to see the character start. Remember, this will make that local. And I'm going to place, again, the start position kind of by the bed, kind of maybe looking over this way, like I just got up in the morning. Perfect. All right, and what we're going to do is we're going to go to my game manager, and we're just going to assign that new start position over to start pause. So now the game will know where to position me to start out with. So let's go ahead and create our function that'll actually do that for us. So right underneath position player, let's do a void start position will be the function name. And we're just going to do something like, well, we just copy this, in fact. and we'll just change up start pause is the new variable name we want it to save to or snap to, and start pause position and start pause rotation. All right, we're still not done yet. We still made a function we haven't called, and we're going to bust out a classic right here. We're going to say private void start. So only in our start function will we call this start position function, and that should give us exactly what we want to do. So it'll only run once in our entire game instead of our game manager, because our game manager only starts once because it persists between scene loads. So it'll make sure it never gets done except at the beginning of our game. If I press play, I wake up by the bed, and if I keep going through my exits, they now work perfectly. And there we go. All right, so that's how we can position our player once we get our load scene functionality working.